I want to explore some of the details you may want to consider traveling with PTSD or traveling as a highly sensitive person. And that brings me to a point, which is that sensitivity can be created in a wide variety of ways. Having PTSD or complex PTSD creates an enormous amount of sensitivity to certain things, loud noises, firecrackers, etc. If you're in the military and the PTSD is associated with gunshots. If the PTSD is associated with romantic relationships, highly abusive spouses or former partners, or highly abusive parents and family members, or bullying in school, the trauma and high sensitivity reaction is not to a gunshot, it's to getting close to people or being in certain types of environments with people. The trigger point that reactivates the trauma circuits of the brain, which are the survival-oriented circuits, are associated with the thing that created the trauma state to begin with. So environmental cues that seem familiar, and so for example, when I was young, particularly in the absence of deep emotional bonds with either of my parents or my siblings, I didn't have the language to develop those bonds with peers at school, so I had zero deep emotional bonds with human beings. In that context, the bond that I formed with my cat was one of the most important emotional bonds of my life at that time. And so when my father just threw away the cat and took us to another country, there was the trauma of the discarding, the lack of care shown for something that was no longer useful, which again, as a child, one begins to realize that when there is a sociopathic pattern present, and it's the mind determining what is respected, what is honored, and what is not, then one starts to be really scared because one realizes there's a profound vulnerability. The brain is one of the most fractious and fragile parts of connection with any human being. Take any single human being, and because of different memories, etc., the brain, its way of looking at things is always unique. So you cannot count on someone else's perspective to line up with one's own. But one can, if one is not sociopathic, one can count on emotions to line up with one's own. Any human being who is not in a sociopathic state will care when another human being is crying, for example. They may not cry for the same reason as that human being, but they will care and empathize with that human being. And so there's a danger when we are with people who have entered the sociopathic state to such an extent that they are rationalizing what's being done as opposed to following a sense of empathy. So when my cat was discarded, because it's only a cat and you don't need that, as opposed to checking in with my feelings about that and its impact, it was traumatic. It was equally clear that to communicate any emotion in this terrain would be to invite violence towards me. In this context, the association of cats, meaning when I was young I didn't have cat allergies. As an adult, when I'm around a cat, I start to sneeze. And I'm told that sometimes sneezing on an energetic level has to do with grief. And so this is just kind of to illustrate how trauma and PTSD develops unusual sensitivity to certain trigger points that relate to the unique experience of the person experiencing trauma and in what context. In other words, had I had a strong, safe emotional bond with a human being, the cat bond would not have been primary. At the same time, if I had had parents with the capacity to have a strong emotional bond, my cat would not have been discarded with a clear message that there will be rage directed at you for making any fuss about it. And so this being the case, when traveling and going into an environment where one doesn't have control of all the details, there's a couple of things that are useful to know. One, what are the trigger points? So these are your allergies, and it's good to get tested if you don't know what they are. I have allergies to cat hair, wheat, and cow milk and cream, and I have mild allergies to wine. So those are and then all of these allergies are exacerbated by lack of sleep and sugar. So those are kind of the 7 variables. And I also have allergies to pollen. And the allergies, I have a little bit of a hypothesis that they're actually psychosomatic, meaning that since I wasn't allergic to cat hair before when I had a cat, for me, I think it's an allergic reaction to the intensity of loss of a strong, sensitive emotional bond to the safest empathic being that I'd connected to at that point. And I'm very sensitive to animals to the extent that a little bit later, I healed a wild rabbit who had been caught by a cat. I healed the rabbit, and the rabbit, once healed, but was never in a cage, would come when I called it. And my cat had such a strong bond with me when I was young that when I went swimming in the water, cats, as you know, don't like water, but my cat would jump in and swim out after me because my cat had that quality of bond. And that kind of speaks to a level of bond that is unusual. It's unusual for an animal, for a rabbit, to respond more like a dog and bond. It's unusual for a cat to swim at all, let alone a cat swimming out after a child and then swimming back with me. And when I had a bird, again, a bird fell out of its nest. I nursed the bird to health. The bird would sit on my shoulder, and once it was healthy, it learned to fly in my care, and it would fly out. I'd leave the window open all the time. We were in Cyprus at the time. And then the bird would come back. And so for some time after the bird flew, I would whistle, and my bird would fly back on my shoulder and fly out again and fly back. Gradually, it spent more and more time out in the wild and less time in the room. It didn't need the food, it didn't need the care. But it still, even in the trees nearby, would often respond to my whistles with singing. And so I think this also speaks a little bit to the complexity of the curse and the gifts of sensitivity, because the curse of sensitivity is, of course, being hyper aroused. It's like having sandpaper rubbed on a certain part of one's consciousness and body, so that the slightest thing feels like an incredible sting. Well, if you can imagine, that happening on the hearing level, what one notices with one's ears is exquisitely more attuned and sensitive than what one would not notice otherwise. So this allows a nuance of perception, a nuance of observation. It also, for example, the aching absence of human connection leads to a transcendence beyond the human culture, because one has no loyalty to a culture independent of its people. One has loyalty to people, and through that loyalty to the culture that those people honor. And so when there is no human bond that's very strong, there's no loyalty to the culture. When there's no loyalty to the culture, it allows consciousness to be much more flexible and fluid in and out of the terrains that are cultural norms. These flexibilities allowed me, for example, to connect more with animals, but I'm also very attuned to anomalous human beings. Someone with autism, someone with Down syndrome, someone who's nervous, someone who has PTSD, someone who's shy, someone who is in an intense emotional state. In all of these anomalous terrains of the psyche that don't fit in the pattern of the cultural norm, I have a lot of flexibility to move out into that terrain and mirror and match and show up for that animal, that human being, in that state, because I'm not seat belted in with my loyalty to the rigidity of our cultural norms. This is a fair amount of divergence from the original theme, and by way of setting context. But when one travels, it's important to know your trigger points, your allergies, what brings out the best in you, what's healing. And then it's important to take charge to assertively and proactively go out in front of your body and negotiate and track. Now, I do this on a couple of levels. From knowing, for example, that I'm more of an evening person than a morning person, I will fly out, like I go to Asia a lot. I will fly out in the evening, and I'll sleep as much as possible on the plane. I'll order a window seat. There's one time I've flown first class. It is a huge upgrade. However, it just bothers me to spend $4,000 on a ticket. So, you know, I just do that when I can with miles. So I'm going to use a window seat so that I can rest against something, but rather than holding my head up all the time. I'm going to use Bose Quiet Comfort headphones, which you can get used now, and that lasts a long time, and that's going to take about 40% of the stimulation down. I'm going to wear a blinder, and I may wear sunglasses just to dim the light down because I don't like the brightness of a lot of the light. And because my body is being forced to go through more stimulation than is comfortable, I'm going to try and reduce the stimulation on my eyes, not look at much TV or movie. So I can do that with sunglasses. I can also just keep my iPad, flying, eye block elastic thing that they give you on the plane, and I keep a spare one in my carry-on. I can keep it just partly over my eyes, so I have to kind of look up slightly to see where I'm going, but I am having eye contact and about half of the peripheral visual noise distracted, so I can just focus on keeping one step in front of the other, which is much less energy intensive and much less stimulating than my mind analyzing every sign, every advertisement and stuff that I'm going along with. I will hire a porter rather than exert myself to carry and wrestle with bags. And the most important thing is when I get to an area, I like to have enough, when I'm coming to a new area, I like to have enough time to visit. I will look at the reviews, screening for noise. I like Expedia because it's the easiest interface that I've found to order from. But what I will typically do is I'll arrive, I'll touch down in the afternoon, and I'll start taking a taxi around some of the hotels that get good reviews. If possible, I will do a couple of things. I'll be way out in the middle of nowhere, particularly in rural areas, and might stay in a 1 or 2 star hotel where I have a nice rapport, and I'm looking for a good contact and good communication with one person who's the owner. The owner who's also the cook, who's also, and just has a very small establishment. Because if I have good rapport with them, and there's not a lot of change in the staff, it's so much easier than having to repeat myself to multiple people. Or I'll often stay in a 5-star hotel where, even though there's a lot of staff juggling, they do an excellent job of taking care of me. And so I find out where that is. I go around to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 places. I ask to see the room that I would actually stay in if I paid immediately or booked on Expedia. And I usually book at the moment of arrival. If I have a great experience then once I've built up a rapport, for example, I'm staying at the Chatrium Riverside Hotel in Bangkok. It's a 4.5-star resort hotel. It was intended to be condominiums, but the condos didn't all sell, so they turned one of the buildings into a hotel. So I'm getting condo suites at 3 times the size of many of the other 5-star hotels, with balconies, with window control, and it's very quiet. And so I spend a night, and I look at the friction points, and I see, can I control those? So for example, this morning, there was a 30% louder than I liked, quite active beat during breakfast, and I'm just kind of slowly surfacing. I don't want to hear anything active. So I've got a good rapport with the restaurant manager, and I asked him to change the track and reduce the sound 30%, which he instantly did. I also don't like waiting. I prefer to be more active. Waiting is hard for me because I'm then left without a concentrated focus, and memories and emotions start to bleed into the space, and I don't know where that's going to take me. And so it's vulnerable. And so I have a approach for that, which is I call even though it's a buffet restaurant, they don't have everything I like for my allergies in the buffet. This hotel caters to all my allergies and will give me everything that I want. So I call in. I say, this is Kun Rose. Do you remember me? There's a lot of staff, and only about 30% of them do. So this morning, yes, she remembered me. I said, I will have the same breakfast I always have. She said, Ka, so she's getting it. It's in Thailand. And then I said, give me a call when it's ready. She said, Ka, so done. About 30 minutes later, which is 30 minutes of agony waiting that I'm sidestepping in this way, there's a call. Breakfast ready, Mr. Rose. So then I go down, or I go down in 10 minutes after I've finished what I'm doing. So a little process. I bring crystals, which are the equivalent of meditative focal points, sacred focal points. Sacred has associations of beauty, of love, of divinity, and so whatever has that significance for you, be it art or anything else, a focal point has the power, particularly for those with PTSD, of creating narrow-band thought in a very positive direction, sidestepping diffuse, unfocused awareness in which the PTSD type things get into hyper alert. So I'm doing that, and so while I'm waiting, I do a little bit of that. I love doing creative projects like this video, because while I'm doing a video like this, it's a narrow band focus. I've got eye contact with myself as I'm looking into the camera, which holds my attention. I'm focusing on being of service to you, and I'm focusing on what I'm learning, because one part of me is listening to everything that I'm saying and actually taking notes, like, oh, I didn't know that. That's what that's about. And this brings into another point, that there are partitions. When there's trauma, there is partitions and partitioning within the brain, and one part of the brain doesn't know what the other part of the brain knows, because the point of the partition is pain management, overwhelm and pain management. Now, if the partition came down and we were just flooded with all the trauma emotion, it's too much. So the question is, without taking down the partition, how do you get information from one part of the brain that knows something to another part of the brain that doesn't know something? Well, I find that focusing on an intention, in this case the theme of travel nuances as sensitive people, through a medium, in this sense the ritual of making a recording, with the vehicle of speaking, brings the information from that intention in my voice to another part of my brain that's connected with listening and observing, that didn't know what was happening or what was going on until I said it. So in this way, it's also a very elegant way to get information from this side of the brain over to this side of the brain. And I learn. And then I assume that if I'm learning so much, there's going to be other people that learn something. And this is one of the reasons that I talk so much and need to talk so much, is that I, the listening part of the brain, don't get what the talking part of my brain is saying until I hear it. So it's really useful for me. So a couple of other things that I will do is, in terms of, I have this fatigue and stimulation curve. And so I started off with a fairly wide envelope where I can absorb a lot, maybe around 10, 11 a.m. after a nice sleep, a nice breakfast. So we're going up the river to look at temples. And so we take the boat from the hotel up to the free point, which is kind of the nexus where all the boats depart from. I don't want to wait. Again, I want to block myself from that diffuse awareness. I don't want to wait. And so I take the next quickest boat to stay focused. It happens to be a semi-private boat. I'm willing to pay more money to stay moving. It's quite crowded where we go, so my stimulation box for the day fills up pretty quickly. I start to get tired from all the walking, chronic fatigue, exhaustion, stimulation. And we need to head back. And there's a time limit. Well, the first stimulation management tool I do is I step into an air-conditioned coffee shop that's silent. The second thing that I've done on a very big level is I've gone to Thailand, one of the most peaceful, emotionally warm places on the planet. So there's no horn honking, there's no shoving, there's no aggression. There's just thousands of people with a level of sophisticated harmony that few Western countries even begin to comprehend, let alone embody. And so I'm in this place by design. Things took a little longer than I thought. The king has recently died, so there's double the normal traffic in the temples, this particularly being the King's Palace Temple. And so I find my way to a pier, and I pay 30 times more money. No, actually it's not even that. I pay 10 times more money for a private boat that leaves instantly, giving me no stimulation with space, no delay, and instantly taking me back to my hotel. And then I rest to give myself space to build up some reserves before an airline flight to one of the islands, where I again have made preparation. I know where I'm going. I know the resort. I know the room that I've picked, that I've stayed at many times. I keep a suitcase at that resort with stuff I don't want to lug around, and they lay it all out there in preparation for my arrival. I know the staff. So there's familiarity, which reduces stimulation. It's a serene garden villa. It's within a comfortable budget, so that I'm not worrying about money. It's got an outdoor bathtub, so I can take a bath and look out at the stars at night, and quiet. I look for hotels that don't have hardwood doors that slam, that have little cushions between the woods. Sometimes I will add those cushions to the hotel in the neighboring rooms. You just keep a little sticky pad of felt cushions, and you can ask the manager, I want to put these cushions on your doors so they don't make noise. Well, it costs you $1, and you have no more slamming hardwood doors jarring you out of your peaceful state and triggering PTSD. So these are some of the things that have worked for me, and there's some more, but I'm going to close now because I haven't figured out how to make recordings longer than 32 minutes on this camera. So blessings and good luck traveling to peaceful and beautiful places.